It is now time for our Q&A session. If you have a question to ask it, go ahead and type it in the Zoom chat box. Our moderator this evening is Managing Editor Adria Vasil from Corporate Knights Magazine, the voice for clean capitalism. Over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. It is a pleasure to be here tonight and moderate this conversation on the circular economy. I get a little too excited about this topic. Not everyone does, but I think I'm in good company here with the panel, and many of you would feel the same way. Now, my first question is for Stephanie. Before joining this panel, I was chatting about it with somebody, telling them about the circular economy, and they hadn't heard it before, and they said, "This sounds amazing, it's so inspiring. Why aren't we doing it yet?" And it's a good question. I didn't really know how to answer it, so I thought maybe, Stephanie, you could take a stab at that.
Well, I think that what's new here is the big vision of that's been put forward from the circular economy. I think that actually we've got bits and pieces of the circular economy happening around us already, but they've been happening in kind of fragmented ways. So, you know, Francis is from HP. We all have examples in our offices, maybe when we're back in our offices before pandemic, but, you know, of how photocopiers changed from a time when I was young and you actually had to manage every aspect of your photocopier to photocopiers being on a service basis. Or many people now have, say, natural gas furnaces in their house that they don't buy, but they lease and they're serviced by their utility. So these are examples that are already around us. What's quite different with the circular economy is trying to systematize, bring more of a kind of consistent vision and documentation around this. And in addition, this isn't just the recycling economy of the past. What we're looking at is some the addition of some new technologies, digital technologies, AI, new material technologies that are really catapulting this forward in a way that was only a vision perhaps in some earlier models of what a sustainable economy could look like. We have this growing global momentum towards this new vision. So I'm also very excited by it. I'll say I've been working on environmental issues for 3 decades now, and this is one of the visions that I feel really brings together many different threads of environmental issues that have been operating in isolation from each other in the past.
Thanks, Stephanie. Francis, who is the onus really on to push for a circular economy? Is it on industry players such as yourself? Should this be more on government to step in and regulate it? Does it fall to consumers?
I think it falls to all of us actually, and it's how we buy. As I said, every dollar spent sends a signal into the marketplace. If you were looking for a simple thing to do, it's really to think about that product life extension. So buying it as a service is probably the single biggest thing you can do as an individual, but obviously taking that into the workplace too. You know, we're stuck in these capitalist capital budgets, and you know, can we shift that to an operational expense? Some of the stickiness or the lack of moving into this, because it seems so obvious and brilliant, why wouldn't we all be doing it tomorrow? It's some of our financial systems, as Rita mentioned, aren't really built for this. And it's about collaboration both within business or within organizations and outside of organizations, which we typically haven't done a lot of either. So it's getting us to grow some new muscles and flex them a little better. But yeah, very exciting. And I just want to add one point. You know, we're sort of touting this as a somewhat new idea, but really, as Caroline mentioned, it's been around for a long time. We're just dusting it off and everything old is new again, right?
True, very good point. Rita, you talked at length about how climate change and climate risk have become major boardroom topics within the financial sector over the last few years. Is the financial sector also starting to consider the risks of things like companies being affiliated with plastic pollution or the impacts of incoming plastic bans?
I think so, because this represents social risk and reputational risk for financial institutions if they're not thinking about these issues. We have the Canadian banking regulator also pushing financial institutions to think about climate risk and how it affects all aspects of their business. There is an expectation from the regulator that boards and executives think about this in a holistic way, and not just, in terms of how these risks are represented on their balance sheet, but kind of the future risks that they may encounter in their businesses.
We could unpack all these at length, but as we talk about future risks, Caroline, you mentioned that the Indigenous economy, as you said, is the original green economy, the original circular economy that for millennia really has managed resources for the long term. Now, last couple centuries, we've been veering more towards the destructive make, make, and dispose economy. Does it give you comfort now to hear major corporations talking about embracing circular economy principles, or do you have any concerns?
No, thank you. I think that it is giving hope to, when we look at the lower level of just the resource and the nature of how it circulates. I think what is interesting in that is that the opportunity can be there of also how we relate to each other. So a lot of my thinking around economics and Indigenous inclusion has been shaped largely by in whose worldview are we operating from. So as many of you may exist right now within a urban setting, I'm here in Victoria, BC, that when you look outside, the world is reflected back largely from a singular worldview. So the same as our banking systems, product design, development, and it's when we see the expansion of worldview within the constructs and principles of the circular economy is when we're going to see the highest potential of the capacity of what it's actually intended to be able to do. And if a end outcome of that is also a return to our humanities and relating to each other, then that's an element of success that doesn't exist within the current mainstream economy. Thank you.
You talk about the relational economy and the importance of that in the indigenomics. And I wonder how you see that playing out and kind of meshing in with the current economic model as we transition to something a little bit more holistic. Caroline, if you don't mind unpacking that a little bit more for us.
For sure. So I talked about those within my New Channel worldview about distinct design principles that allow decision making for the long term. So understanding those principles and how those frame decision making, that's really the element of relational economics. So how we are in relationship to time right now, and time less from a linear perspective, but time from that future-paced economic reality that we're creating right now. So I think the other panelists referred to that of how our behavior as individual drives outcomes within this circular economy, that it can't be externalized to the federal government or regulated, that the realization of our power as individuals is also formative concept to that idea of a relational economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Stephanie, just to back up a little bit, many people listening, if they heard of the circular economy before today, tend to associate it with eliminating landfill-bound waste. Now, you mentioned some examples like Mud Jeans and Loop's refill model that do just that. But what about the climate impacts of all this? It's something that Rita touched on as well, talking about climate finance and so on. How does a circular economy benefit the climate?
Thanks for that question. I really feel that it's the missing dimension of the climate conversation, because for every pound of material that we use in a wasteful way, or that we use when we don't need to use it, or that we don't reuse, we create a lot of carbon impact. And one of the ways that we can get towards our, our net zero goals is by really starting to look more stringently at whether all that carbon investment is actually for material that's needed in the economy. So you're basically driving through, by being much more efficient at the materials use phase, you're basically driving efficiencies all the way up the supply chain and getting to carbon reductions through that approach. I will say that within the circular economy paradigm is also an emphasis on using renewable energies as the main energy source for the circular economy as well.
Thank you for that. I think it's an important connection to make that doesn't always get addressed when we talk about the circular economy. We have a few audience questions piling up. This question is from Jim to Francis. Just wondering what the impetus or motivation was to go to instant ink. Was it a carrot or a stick? And will carrots and sticks be adopted by government as policies? Good question, Jim.
Okay, so I think it's a number of things, but I'd say a technological advance in the Internet of Things, where the printer can actually order the ink for you. It's got the intelligence and can mesh with our systems. So it's both. And I think from a government perspective, I mentioned that Canadian governments collectively are about 13% of GDP. If we could take them from basically not very much at all, sustainability or circularity embedded in their procurement, to a lot, that would drive the economy faster than almost anything else I can think of. It would happen fast enough for us to meet our Paris targets. It would really change the way the marketplace is being driven. And it's such a powerful tool that we already have in our pockets. We don't need to reinvent something. We just need to put some commitments and some resources into doing this, and we could make this happen quite quickly, I would say. So we have the tools, we just need to do it.
And your preference, carrot or stick?
I think the procurement is a carrot, and I think businesses respond much better to that. We exist to delight our customers, and if our customers are asking us to do things, we're going to jump over backwards to do it. Sticks are a lot harder, they take time. The good companies will step forward and follow a stick, but then you've got to make the laggards come along with you, and that costs money and energy, and we don't have that. In the decade of climate action, we just got to get on and get it done.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Jonas to Rita. In terms of climate conscious investing, I've been disappointed to find a lot of socially responsible investing products with major holdings in corporations like Amazon and Apple that I consider problematic for environmental reasons like packaging and planned obsolescence. Do you know of or see plans for investment products that support companies committed to circular economy principles?
Well, this is a great question, and this speaks to the issue of greenwashing, and also what I pointed out in my talk, which is that we need more clarity in Canada about what we mean when we use labels such as green or sustainable to describe investments. I think the United States and Europe are probably farther along on this curve than Canada is at the present time. But yes, I think that this is something that investors are demanding increasingly because there is this whole ESG movement pushing for companies to be more sustainable. I think a lot will depend on what our securities regulators in Canada eventually do in terms of setting standards for climate disclosures by publicly traded companies. Canada and Canadian companies currently lack American companies on climate disclosures at this point. And, it's really being done on a voluntary basis. And there's no clear standard for what is being disclosed. And this is a real problem because investors need to be able to make smart decisions about where to put their money. And they also need the opportunity to assess their risk appetite for new investments. And they can't really do that if they're kind of guessing as to what is really green or what might be green and sounds good on paper, but may be actually very high risk as an investment and may not be appropriate for them.
Greenwash has been a perpetual problem in all areas of the environmental movement, and it's surprising it for me, it's this one as well. Hopefully we have a bit more parameters on here in the future to limit the greenwashing in the sector. We have a good question from Larry and Eva to Caroline. What is the time frame for a successful circular economy project? Does it depend on the sector? Are there any examples today other than the Indigenous successes?
Thank you for the question. I think that humanity is looking at a collective now. So defining success within a project means isolating the elements of that success and learning. We're in a learning environment within the circular economy, and it's the learnings that are taken from that where the success is, more so I believe than the end outcome of that. So we look at some of these examples on here of asking, how come, which countries are leaders in this, or which companies are leaders in this, and the foundations of that, of what we learn about that, I think is more important than the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Fred to everyone on the panel. The Ontario government has been presented with the need to demand producer responsibility for products. For example, producer takes them back and recycles them, reuses them, rather than municipalities paying for their blue box programs. How can we push government to demand this process? Who wants to kick that off? Stephanie?
Sure. So I'll say that extended producer responsibility is considered by many to be essentially the cornerstone for the regulatory system that's needed for circular economy. But I really want to underscore that it's far from sufficient for what's going to be needed. We're really talking about systems innovation, system-wide change. So systems innovation across supply chains. There's a great example in Quebec where universities have been working with businesses, with governments, with civil society, trying to look for kind of cross-cutting solutions. And regulations such as extended producer responsibility on their own, while they're very important, and there's very, I think, hopeful conversations in Canada right now about how to greatly strengthen our extended producer responsibility systems. But that's just a fragment of the type of legal, regulatory, and governance changes that are going to be needed to shift towards a circular economy.
Thank you. Francis, how do you approach that issue, the producer responsibility piece as an industry player? Is that something that you guys lobby for when you're in conversation with government? Do you support that system?
Absolutely, and I helped put in the electronics take-back programs across the country, so I have some experience in doing that. But I would still say, as Stephanie said, the regulatory process is slow. When you're dealing with an industry that's as innovative and changing as quickly as ours, it's very difficult to keep up with even product definitions by regulation, right? It's always lagging. So I think it does a certain part of the job, but there's so much more needed. And it's why I have come to the conclusion that procurement is the nimblest tool we have. It's the most enticing tool. It is the biggest carrot for business to be striving for. And, EPR is really fixing a recycling problem. And the circular economy is trying to fix a design problem. So I think we need to go much further upstream. And if you're familiar with the Ellen MacArthur diagram for how the circular economy works, there's a whole bunch of inner loops that have to happen, like this product life extension piece and offering products as a service before you get to that end of life piece, if that makes sense. And you need to design your products to be able to be repaired and for longer product lives and to be recyclable. They're all elements. And unfortunately, with Canadians, we tend to believe that recycling will fix everything. And it's the last piece of the puzzle, not the first.
No, we don't have a lot of time. I know I could keep you here all night. I'm sure you all have other things to do. But I would like to get your thoughts on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it is affecting the circular economy movement in your respective sectors. Will there be lasting repercussions for good or for bad? And how do we ensure that the economic recovery plans boost the circular economy moving forward? If you could each answer that from your vantage point. Did you want to kick things off, Caroline?
Sure, thank you. Here in Victoria, BC, we have the Rising Economy Task Force that is looking at both the dashboard of understanding immediate effects and also learning in real time how cross-sectoral learning and responses can happen in a more efficient way. And I think that's the environment that we're in, is that we're building it. So it's like laying the tracks at the same time that we're building this as we go forward within this environment. I've come from, I think that was last year, of being on the Smart Cities jury here in Canada, and really realizing that the level of innovation and the level of system design innovation needs to be considerably raised in comparison to that system design of what we're seeing in other countries. So with that system design lag in innovation, we're also needing to see that efficiency happen within the government as well. And both of those are essentially looking at each other within what this current COVID economic response is right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Rita, could you answer that from your vantage point?
Sure. Well, Canadian banks right now are very concerned about the economic crisis that Canada finds itself in because of sparked by this pandemic. Their main concern at this point is, what's going to happen with provisions for credit losses. So how many loans are going to turn sour, both on the business and on the consumer side? We all know that the CERB program has ended, and there is concern about what is going to happen when people shift to the either unemployment insurance or if they try to get back into the workforce. What is going to happen when their kind of payment holidays on mortgages and credit cards or auto loans expires? That is probably the number one priority for banks and banking regulators at this time. I was reading the other day a report by one of the credit rating agencies that said that globally demand for green bonds is expected to slow somewhat this year because of the pandemic. And there have been other impacts as well. The Bank of England was supposed to conduct its first climate stress tests for banks. And that was supposed to be very widely and closely watched by regulators all over the world, including here in Canada, because it was really supposed to kind of set the standard for what these climate tests could look like. Those have been postponed until next year. So I think we're going to see some delay on this issue, or making progress on the issue of a circular economy from the banking perspective until we really get this economic crisis under control.
Thank you, Rita. Francis. How is
Yeah,
it?
so one of the interesting things for us was the uptick in 3D printing for things like headbands for face shields. 3D print, which of course we're going into heavily, really shortens supply chains, and it has a pretty impressive impact on the circular economy because of the shortening of supply chains, but also for the manufacturing of spare parts. If you think about it, we've all got something at home that has a broken plastic knob on it and therefore it's not working. But if you have an infinite inventory of spare parts in the cloud, and you can just print it on a 3D printer nearby you, you can repair that item much faster and more easily. So sort of that uptake of 3D print, distributed manufacturing is pretty exciting from my perspective, and I expect we'll just see that just grow. And it's that big. It's been called the fourth industrial revolution, which is pretty cool. The other thing I think is the way we approach global supply chains and the resilience needed in those supply chains. What are the strategies you take for things like a pandemic that will strike one country, and just as that country's coming back on, it hits somewhere else? It's a bit of a whack-a-mole. Where are your production facilities? If you had two, a traditional supply chain would be, you need duplication. You need one main factory and a backup factory that's making widget A or widget B. And in the case of a complicated product like a PC, you need 100 widgets, or 1,000 widgets. It gets very complicated very fast. So I think you'll start to see some different thinking in supply chains, which hopefully can be done with a sustainability lens as well, which will help everybody.
Thank you for that. And Stephanie, unfortunately, we're running low on time, so you're going to close us out. How has the pandemic affected the circular economy movement from your vantage point? And do you worry about lasting repercussions, good or bad? How could we boost the circular economy moving forward?
I'd say it's a learning moment for the circular economy. I think that a lot of what the circular economy is trying to do is address resilience in supply chains, material resilience through better security of feedstock, more diversity of feedstock. But I think that what the pandemic is challenging us to also think about is about social resilience. And I think the big risk is that the business models that we're leaning towards as we look towards a circular economy are the very types of business models with very flexible workforces, gig economy, etc., that has been the basis for the vulnerability of so many people in this pandemic. So I see this as a learning moment for us to start thinking more carefully about how we build social and ecological resilience at the same time as we move into the circular economy.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of our speakers for engaging in this conversation. There is so much more we could say, but unfortunately it's time to wrap up our Q&A. Apologies to all those with questions that didn't get answered. And with that, I will hand it back to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Stephanie Cairns, Francis Edmonds, Rita Tritcher, and Carol Ann Hilton, and of course to you, Adria Vasil, for being our moderator this evening. Yes, there is so much to discuss, but this conversation will continue on in many ways.